earlier on. It's amazing. He says, there's lots of discussion at the sexual revolution debate about whether the revolution failed men or failed women, or helped men more than women, or helped women more than men. Nobody asked whether the sexual revolution failed children. People already know. It's too depressing of a topic.
Yeah, absolutely accurate. It basically failed both genders, but when you fail both genders, you fail children because they're the remnants of two broken people. So I think it's massively failed children, but I think in some ways it's definitely favored the man that has no desire to invest and have responsibility. That's the only man that favors from this, is he gets a bunch of women to have low enough self-esteem that they will be able to allow him access without any investment. Meanwhile, while he can then go on to meet the girl he actually wants to be with, whilst this girl is happy to come at 4 a.m. after a night out. So it's the opposite of feminism. It's allowing men free reign over females, and whilst investing very, very little. I don't know who tricked women into thinking that this is beneficial, but whoever did is probably a man.
And then down the line from that, they've also managed to trick women into believing that it's fine for the guy to stay at home and play video games and make sure that the sandwiches are done all day. You can go out and earn the money. Yeah, I mean, it's such a trope, but people make these funny tweets online about how the patriarchy is so powerful it conned women into providing for men as well.
Yeah, and the other thing that I spoke about this quite recently is the pushing the bisexuality, which only again benefits.
What's that? I haven't heard you talk about this.
Well, in pornography, there is a lot of emphasis on girl, and there's a lot of threesomes and so on and so forth. And in my personal experience, seeing a lot of straight women engage in threesome activities primarily to please the man, but they'll convince themselves that they like girls, but they only seem to like girls in the presence of their partner that suggested the threesome, and they only seem to like the girl that their partner had an insight into selecting. And it's not true bisexuality, because when their husband or their partner's not there, they no longer have this interest in women. And also when they really care about the guy, they don't engage in the threesomes. And I know when they love the guy a lot, they don't want to share him. But if you were truly bisexual, you wouldn't have that jealousy, because you'd be like, this is an equal playing field. I also get to touch the girl. But what I think that's happened is the rise in kind of sexual experimenting is again only benefiting men. I know so many men that are in open relationships where he can sleep with other women, but she can't sleep with other men, but she can sleep with other women. Who benefits from that?
So the presumption is that they're not actually bisexual, right? It does seem, looking at some of the data, like women are more bisexual than men are, genuinely bisexual, at least self-identifying outside of relationships. Yeah. But yes, I would agree that I was surprised with this rise of the one-sided open relationship. And the threesomes. In Austin, there's a lot of marriages where we're open, but it's only girls and it's only when we're together. Maybe this is what they want.
I would be curious what the data would be amongst women who've never watched porn and their level of bisexuality. I would imagine women who have never watched porn, they would have lower rates of bisexuality than women who are addicts or watch regularly, and who are partnered with men who also make the suggestion about threesomes. I would wonder how many women who, without the external influences, because we've been taught for many, many years in the recent data that homosexuality and bisexuality is innate and it's something you're born with. But if the advent of pornography increased it, then it must have some external forces behind it.
Yeah. Well, there's one of the legitimations for this is the left-handedness argument, and it's used for trans people, but it might apply here. It's kind of a useful frame, so I'll tell everybody, and let me spin a yarn. So during the Middle Ages, people who were left-handed were seen as being touched by the devil. They were seen as being witches, right? So it caused lots of people who would have been left-handed to hide their left-handedness. They weren't their true selves. As the world began to realize that being left-handed wasn't associated with being a witch or a wizard, that was relinquished, and I think the percentage went from less than 5 to around about 12% of the population is left-handed. That's they're being their true selves. There is an argument made that one of the justifications for an increase in trans youths and trans adults is that previously the judgments of society created a glass ceiling that made people keep it away because they were worried about being judged. Now that the judgment has been released, I'm free to be my open and honest self.
In terms of transgender, that doesn't explain the suicide rate still being exactly the same, despite the world now accepting it. So there must be an underlying mental health concern that may have then be a precursor to the gender kind of not identifying it. In terms of bisexuality, what I would then ask is, if we have now removed the stigma for bisexuality, why are not more men saying to their wives, can we add a man to the mix? Can we have it where, you can sleep with lots of men and I can sleep with lots of men? Why is that not being seen as sexy?
Why that is a strange thought experiment to consider. Why are
women there saying, oh, can your friend come and you two do things and I just watch? That doesn't happen. Women are not sitting there telling their husband, can you tell your friend to come over and you two just do, I promise I won't get involved. The way men do. Men are
How do you think, so I think that there's definitely an asymmetry going on here.
Yeah.
With how men see their partner, their female partner being with another female.
Yeah.
How do you think women would perceive their male partner being with another man?
There's no going back from that. From most women, for most women, I'm not speaking of all women, but once they see the man go, because the thing is, women, when they provide each other with sexual stimulation, it's nothing really a man can't do also. But when a man provides another man with sexual stimulation, women can't compete with that. It's a completely different experience. So therefore, we are like, you don't like, there's nothing I can do for you. Yeah, you're at the wrong shop here, son. You have to go back to a bit. With women, I think when men are watching on other women, there's nothing that they can do to each other that he can't really get involved in.
There's something strange. I don't know why, but it feels like a one-way street that goes in opposite directions. A woman that's bisexual, every man presumes that it's just a phase, and that she'll go back from a liquid diet onto a solid diet eventually. Every man that's bisexual, more men that are bisexual are considered to just be in the closet but have not fully committed to doing it yet. And I don't know where this comes from. I have no idea whether or not this is actually shown up in the data. There's definitely more bisexual women and there's more gay men. I know this.
But from speaking to bisexual men, they say that if they are bisexual, they end up just choosing homosexuality because I know women don't really accept bisexuality in them.
That's interesting. So it's not necessarily what they want, it's what they can get.
In my experience of working with bisexual men, usually the bisexuality is not always, but can be linked to some childhood sexual abuse. With childhood, and the data also supports this, and the rates of childhood sexual abuse that leads to bisexuality in men is higher than amongst heterosexuals. So usually what happens is they may have experienced some abuse by somebody of the same gender. Now, what happens is, as a result of that experience, it still creates a template of sexual desire that they are open to exploring as an adult as a way of reducing the trauma. When we've been traumatized, the only way that we think we can untraumatize ourselves is by voluntarily re-traumatizing ourselves. So they end up exploring a little bit or being a bit curious and stuff, but maybe they were actually heterosexual, but that trauma led them astray. And if they want to go back to being heterosexual, women aren't as accepting, and so they end up sometimes just going down.
It's a brutal situation that you get into because you have to either choose to be untruthful to your partner if they ever ask about your sexual history, or agree to open up about something that you're fearful about how they're going to respond. It's kind of the same as the sort of one-way street of doing OnlyFans or sex work as a woman, that you are going to have to concede that in future you're either going to have to tell your partner and deal with the potential ramifications of that, or you're going to have to not tell them.
And when it's a partner that they accepts it and knows about it, he usually, when it comes to the OnlyFans, is somebody who's addicted to pornography and almost likes that. But the man that's addicted to pornography is very difficult for an OnlyFans woman to be with, because they're usually men who still require novelty and still require more women. And so it enhances the low self-esteem for her, unfortunately.
There was this stat that I put in my newsletter this week. Involuntary childlessness is a male problem too. 25% of men over 42 do not have children, 5% more than women of the same age group. Almost 40% have experienced depression, 25% feel a deep anger. There is a lot of publicity, quite rightly, about women and childlessness, but men are very mute about this. And that was in The Guardian.
Oh, wow. And I completely agree, because one thing that men online, their voice online to kind of shame women is, well, you don't have kids, you don't have kids. But unfortunately, who suffers more from when you don't have kids? What they find is women without kids and without marriage earn, I think, about 70% more than men that don't have marriage and kids, because marriage and kids gives men a purpose and meaning that they can't derive from anything else. It gives them the motivation to work harder. It gives them the motivation to do those hard jobs that pay more. It gives them a will to live. With women, we can still find connections with our friends and family and parents, and we can spread out our connections. But if you look at most men, like if we look at your fathers and like, in that generation, without their wives, they're a bit lost. I know my dad would not know what to do with his day if my mom wasn't around. And as they age, one of the things that doctors always say, the first thing that as you get older and you go to the doctors, they'll say to you, have you got a wife? And even with my dad, when they do a checkup, have you got a wife? They check, because why? Because the rate of healing after surgery is faster and quicker when you have a wife. And your rate of recovery from cancer is better when you have a wife. Somebody checking in on you does a lot for a man, because they don't get that from their social network as much as women do. So a woman aging alone, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but she's more adapted to it than a man aging alone, who then starts to self-sabotage, and actually kind of life becomes a slow suicide for them.
I had a look at Dr. Robert Waldinger, the guy who is currently heading the longest ever longitudinal study of happiness. And marriage seems to add about 4 years of lifespan to a man. For a woman, it's around about the same. So men get, for all of the marriage is a terrible deal for guys. She's going to take everything in the divorce. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of divorce, terrible. And it's not great for either party. But the deal for men is really fucking good. You want to live 4 years longer? Like, find a partner. More
and responsible more. But one thing I would say is that the family laws are so horrible in certain countries. And I'm a big advocate for marriage, but mainly because I come from a spiritual and religious background. But from a non-religious background, I can see why it seems like a death sentence to get the law involved and to get married, because she can walk away with a lot, even if like she was up to blame. So I can understand where the fear comes from, but you almost have to take that risk in order to get the reward of a stable, responsible life.
I think the risk is increasing and the reward has stayed the same.
But the risk can be mitigated by a good selection. When you start trusting your decisions, you'll be less likely to be fearful of these consequences. But when you make poor decisions, of course, everything is a risk.
Why do you think there's this generalized culture of anti-children and family creation at the moment?
I wonder where that's stemming from. I do think it's a sad reality. I don't know where that's coming from. I just think the reality is there's so many alternatives to having kids now. You can travel, you can really become something. If you want to become famous, you can become famous. You can travel the world, you can make a lot of money, you can do all of these things. But, if you speak to people who have even, scored goals in the World Cup, they'll still tell you that their best moment of their life is when their child was born. So I think it's a really negative thing to place, to kind of put on society. I think the reality is when you know that you're going to have kids, you have to take more responsibility of your life. You have to save more money. You have to look after your health. It gives you a will to live. Now, to remove that from you is a slow and steady self-sabotage. When you don't have any children for the rest of your life and you think you're never going to have them, essentially you could be a car wreck and no one's going to watch you. Whereas when you have children, it's an automatic therapy. You have to fix your traumas. You have to fix your self-sabotaging behaviors. So you're depriving yourself of reaching your full potential when you completely write that off, I believe, but I could be wrong with that.
You are preaching to the choir. I think that it's really great. All of my friends that have become fathers, they've stepped up in a way that I'm impressed by. Like they were hitters before and they're even bigger hitters now.
Yeah.
Which is why it surprises me that there is this generalized anti-children, anti-family creation culture.
It's really good. Like sometimes, and they even do it with men that are in in trouble with the law and stuff. Sometimes when they have children, it's the only way to get them off the streets, because it's the only thing that gives them that motivation that they can't find outside of it. But so if you are feeling that, maybe it's you need to sit down, have a kid.
Well, I understand what you mean as well, that there is this kind of mass individualism. I think that some of the most common reasons as to why people aren't getting into relationships at the moment, working on myself right now, just don't feel ready, sort of biding my time, so to speak.
Super childish though.
It's just, it's a focus on the individual, and it's very isolationist, it's very atomized, it's all about the individual on their own. And don't get me wrong, if you spend your time, maybe you're working from home post-COVID, maybe your job doesn't actually require you to interact with that many other people, or maybe you're doing it all through Slack and through Zoom. you don't need to really leave the house that much anymore. You can DoorDash your food. You can Amazon Prime, whatever it is that you need. You can stay on the couch and watch Netflix. We've become more isolated, and I think that trend almost causes us to justify more isolationism. And it's called extended adolescence or slow life strategy that Jean Twangy found. And this is just never really getting to the stage of growing up. Young people are getting their driver's licenses later. They're starting work later. They're moving out of the house later. Like the most common living arrangement for men under the age of 30 is still being at home with their parents.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I get a lot of slack on for online, because I talk a lot about age gaps. And sometimes young women, they go for older men and they'll say, yeah, but he's 40. I know I'm only 22, but at least he'll be more responsible and he will settle down. Responsibility, maturity is not defined by age. It's defined by how much responsibility you have. And I always say, if he's got to 40, no kids, no marriage under his belt, he's chosen that Peter Pan lifestyle. No 23-year-old is going to come along and wake him up. He's chosen to be that man. Are you sure you want to be with him? You're better off with a 30-year-old that's got more responsibility than a 45-year-old who hasn't. Because if you think a number defines maturity, you're lost. The reality is, it's the amount of responsibility, particularly responsibility and care for others. So if he's supporting family, if he's supporting an ex-wife, or he was married, or he had kids, it does something to men. It creates a level of responsibility and accountability that they can't get without that. So I do always tell women, don't be afraid of being with a man that's had kids, or a man that's been married. They're better than the ones that have had no baggage, because baggage is responsibility, which is then accountability for a man.
Do you think that the same is true in reverse?
No, unfortunately. It doesn't work the same way with women. Not always. It can sometimes, but it doesn't always work the same way, because women, when they have children, good women with healthy women actually prioritize the children first and foremost. And if she does, one of the priorities is becoming then super cautious of the man that she allows to enter into the man's world. And if she's a really good mother, she tends to keep a good co-parenting relationship with the ex. And a lot of men don't feel comfortable with that. But the true good woman, like the single mom that you should be looking for, is the one that's got a good relationship with her ex-husband. What men do is they prefer the woman that has no contact with the ex, and the kids have never seen the ex, and they think, oh, I'll go for that girl. At least the baby father's not around. That's a signal that she deprives or prevents children from connecting with their father. That's not a good thing. That's not a green flag. That's actually a red flag. So what men are doing is sometimes they're selecting women and thinking she's got children, but she doesn't let the kids see their dad, and they're not in his life, and he was a bum. But what does that tell you about her selection process? And what does that tell you about her ability to co-parent? It's an insight into what would happen if you two broke up. You won't exist for those children. That's not a healthy mother. A healthy mother is, he cheated on me, he was awful, he was a wreck, but the kids need their father. I drop him every Friday. That's the healthy mother. But men don't interpret single motherhood the way they should.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how fatherlessness impacts boys and girls' behavior and what they look for when they grow up and start dating?
With women, they definitely, here's the problem women have when they grow up without a father figure, and they really feel it, is they'll always date a lot older men. So they'll be 17, 18 years old, and they're looking at the 30-year-old and the 35-year-old, and they're getting older and older, and there's a huge gap between them. Now, in my experience of working with women that go for these age gap relationships, is they are in survival mode without a father. They need that safety and comfort. And the conversations that we normally find really boring coming from our father about mortgage rates and saving your money, they sexualize those conversations. So when they hear it from an older man, they're like, oh, he's so responsible. They're not used to it. So they end up initially going for that older man and falling in love. But once they feel safe and they've got the money and they've got the safety, they then look for men around their own age. They end up, it's almost like having a safe, secure base. Once you've got an older father figure in your life, then you go on to see what you're sexually attracted to. But until you've got that secure base, you're in survival mode. You're looking for who can make you feel safe, not who can make you feel who you're attracted to. So they blur the lines between attraction and safety. And they end up looking for it in an older man, but then cheating on him with a younger man.
Do you think that they over prioritize socioeconomic status in that regard?
Rightly so. I understand why, because they don't have a backup plan. When you grow up with your father, at some point he'll help you when things get rough, or he'll leave something for you and stuff, and it naturally creates a level of safety. They don't have that safety, and usually if they come from a single mom home, she's also encouraging her to look for a rich man because it benefits her as well. There's usually some kind of support network. Okay, you can come live with us, and so on and so forth. So they come from a culture of, you don't have to love a man. All men are annoying and they're difficult. So just choose one that's going to give you a good life. So they end up focusing on social economic status, but they also end up with men with low self-esteem, because a man with high self-esteem at 40 years old would recognize he's got nothing in common with a 22-year-old who makes TikToks all day. He wouldn't have any intellectual intimacy. So she ends up with an older man with low self-esteem, who, when she does cheat on him, will still take her back and so on and so forth, who pays every bill or whatever it is. She ends up with a man that she doesn't respect in the long run, but really admires initially because he provides her with that safety she's been craving.
Yeah, you told me about this book you'd been reading to do with parental alienation. What's that?
Well, the thing is, I was looking into parental alienation only because I see it so much going on. But one of the things, punishments women use for a man that she feels has let her down, is depriving him of access to the children. Now, the problem I see happening is with the children of such mothers, especially the men of such mothers, they go on to have very, very abusive relationships. So men who grow up with single moms who blocked access, they end up with women who are very abusive. Either they're unfaithful, or they financially abuse them, or they're just they're physically abusive. They grow up with they end up selecting very abusive women. And from my observation and from what I'm reading, it looks like what happens is when you've been deprived of a father and you've only heard mum's side of the story, what happens is they put their mum on a pedestal. They think women are the innocent victims of harsh men. So what will happen is they're prey to women that need saving. They always gravitate towards women that they can save and help and nurture and say, oh yeah, that man was terrible. I've got you. I'm going to help you. I'm going to show you what life looks like because I've been doing that to mum my whole life. The problem with those women is they are broken beyond you. You can't fix them. Most women can't be saved. They have something broken that they need to fix themselves. But the man that thinks he can save her is the one that's a little bit more delusional, and he gets his self-esteem from seeing her now love him. So unfortunately, he ends up going for very broken women that end up re-abusing him, and he ends up not having those boundaries that he needs with women. So they end up in very poor relationships when they've been raised by a mother that blocks access to fathers.
You often hear about the reverse, about women who look for the guy that's broken, but I can fix him and I can hold on. Why do you think that happens?
We hear it a lot with women. It happens in men as well. We hear it a lot in women because it's a huge ego boost knowing that a man used to be a player, but for you he changed, or he used to be in and out of jail, but for you he changed. Here's the reality. You're competing with people's childhood, not other women. If I've got a man that's really broken and he sleeps around and he's doing drugs or whatever it is, and I think I'm going to fix him and I'm going to be the special person, I'm competing with his childhood traumas. You can't compete with somebody's childhood. Essentially, you're always going to lose. Now, whatever caused that addictive behavior or that abusive behavior still exists before you. You are not the therapist and you are not the cause of the wound. So don't take on that role. You're only going to hurt yourself. The best thing you can do is support them while they heal it. But to attribute his healing to you as a person is a form of narcissism. You're wanting to feel good by his healing, not for the sake of him healing, but for you to get an ego boost to know that you could do it. And it's not the way to do it.
I was looking at a bunch of headlines that had come out recently to do with reality TV dating shows. Yeah. What do you think are the lessons that young people are taking about love, given how many reality TV shows are to do with coupling up and breaking up and making up?
It's about winning. Yeah, it's all about competition. Essentially, what we've done is taken love and turned it into a game show. Now, there's no way that won't have a trickle-down effect on society. What we're learning is to cheat on them before they can cheat on you. Get to Casa Amor and couple up before they can do it themselves. So essentially, we're going into relationships, we're treating our partners as opponents and who can win. And the prize of this kind of competition is who can be the loneliest fastest. Who can create a lonely relationship faster? Who can get single faster? So if I cheat on you first, or if I don't text back first, or if I don't, I win. But what are you winning? What's the trophy of these games? The trophy is a lifetime of loneliness. So essentially, we've made the prize, depression is the prize of depriving yourself of love, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got experience in that. Did you find that it became a competition while you were in there?
So I was pretty bored for all of my experience on Love Island. I was also going through an existential crisis because I was faced with a bunch of people that I thought I was. Yeah. Right? I was adamant that I was this big name on campus party boy, and then I go on Love Island and I'm faced with people who are the role that I was pretending to be. Yeah. And I just read Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist as well. It was like the first book I'd read in probably a decade. So I was kind of in this weird I had this weird out of body experience for a good chunk of that time where all of these things were going on and there was storylines or whatever. And all I was thinking about was this guy. If anyone's not read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, there's this young shepherd boy going on a journey of self-discovery, trying to find out who he is. And that really, really spoke to me at the time. And I was in the south coast of Majorca, which is Spain, and it was in the middle of summer. And I read this book during the media lockdown week and then went in this total fucking fever dream. So my experience of Love Island, I don't think is perfectly representative. Some of the things that I did realize were that it teaches young people that love is a game to be played. That loyalty is both super important and also unbelievably disposable at the same time. Like, think about when Love Island comes on TV in the UK. I'm team such and such, right? Like Cardia or whatever, like Sriss, like, you know, like whatever way that together, they try and do that thing. I'm team this. And then as soon as one person decides they're going to move on, typically if it's a guy, he's being totally unfair. If it's a girl, maybe that dude was a bummer. If he was cute or like sweet, then that was her fault and she shouldn't have done it. It's so, it encourages people to make very quick decisions, to fall very hard, very fast, to have loyalty, but only kind of have loyalty to someone who's likable. Like a lot of people are unlikable people deserve relationships too. You know what I mean? Like it's everybody needs somebody. It really does.
It's like a popularity contest even in there.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. Because, you know, the status...
do you get real emotions, like real jealousy and real anger? Or?
I didn't have a single romantic emotion during Love Island. But I had a lot of bromance. No romance, but a lot of bromance right while I was in there. I cried when I left because I was missing my boys. Like, I didn't want to leave my boys behind. And I had this really intense emotional experience. I'd, you know, spent a lot of time. I'd really connected with guys while I was there. But the girls were perfectly pleasant, but I wasn't bothered about leaving them behind.
Did that affect your self-esteem in any way, that it wasn't connecting with the girls, or not really? Did you just find validation?
Not particularly. I really was not attracted to any of them.
Okay, so then it doesn't feel
we kept on saying when the girls were coming in, everybody had a type, right? And I don't think that they'd read necessarily all of the guys' sheets. And you can see that in the fact that there isn't a single relationship from that season.
Wow,
that's still
not
together.
one?
No one. No.
Even the winners?
Even the winners. No, the winners last less time than anybody else.
Okay.
So, Married at First Sight. Have you seen this story?
I'm familiar with it.
Okay. So for the people that don't know, the transgender bride set to take Married at First Sight UK by storm transitioned age 21 at an NHS hospital before spending £50,000 on cosmetic surgery to be taken seriously as a woman, Mail Online can reveal today. Channel 4 viewers will see Ella Morgan, 29, who was born Evan Morgan, wed a male contestant amid a row over whether the groom was told first or not. Ms. Morgan is shown in the trailer for Married at First Sight, telling her new husband her big secret after they married, having admitted her transition has made her fear rejection after being treated as a dirty secret in the past. However, Channel 4 has now revealed that they did tell the man in advance he would be marrying a trans woman. It is understood that the man is furious with how the broadcaster treated him during the show and afterward. But the beauty and fashion consultant from Bristol says she is determined to be the star of the show to shed light on the struggles and realities of being trans, adding, "We're not freaks or mentally ill. I'm still just like any other girl."
Okay.
It's going to be difficult for you to comment on this one, Sadia.
It is going to be difficult. I'm trying to see how I can behave and not offend, but here's the reality of it. Even if I was born a woman or whatever, and I had millions of cosmetics procedures, and I have a higher risk of depression because of the lifestyle I've chosen, a man has every right to know that and has every right to say it's not for me. It's not for me. I wouldn't be with somebody who was born a woman because it's just not for me. I'm a heterosexual woman and I'm entitled to identify as that. Now, what I find, the thing is, if it's really painful to be transgender and it's a lot of suffering, I don't think it's good for TV to kind of capitalize on that for views and try and use that as somebody suffering as a form of views. But I also say that it does make you different from other women. If you're saying the trans struggle, it was really hard for you in your childhood and you found it really depressing, that makes you different to the woman that grew up in the body she identifies with. So to say that you're on par with the typical woman is not true, because you've gone through a different type of trauma that we haven't. So essentially, you're never going to be like a woman, not even just physically, but also psychologically. You're never going to be like a woman. And it's okay to never be like a woman. It's okay. The thing that I find difficult to understand about the whole trans debate is, one, for many decades, we were told gender is a social construct. It's just this imaginary thing that we're telling people.
We've only been told that for about 1 decade.
Yeah.
Maybe.
We've been told it's a social construct. Everybody's saying it's a social construct. The liberals are saying it's a social construct. But then if you say that you identify as the opposite gender, they give you biological treatment. Now, if it's a social construct, essentially you're only identifying as a social construct. You don't need to change your biology. It doesn't make any sense. It's like saying that your football team who you support is a social construct. I don't need to change my biology to be a Man United supporter, because essentially it's a social construct. So if gender is a social construct, why do we need to transition?
I think the argument on the other side of the fence would be, I want my outer appearance to reflect my inner experience.
Then why not change your inner experience rather than your outer?
I don't know whether they have control over that.
But that's no different to, like, for example, an anorexic will genuinely believe that they are the fattest person on the world. They identify as fat. Now, the reality is, I'm not going to give them a liposuction so that their brain and their body are aligned. I have to look at the psychological defect that caused them to be unaligned and focus on the psychology first. And if that doesn't work, then we can look at biological procedures. But the reality is, I don't see how, when it comes to anorexic, I get that there's, it's not healthy or whatever it is. But at the same time, we know the suicide rates in transgenders is not healthy either. We're doing them a disservice by simply giving them a shortcut to biological procedures while skipping psychological interventions.
Yeah, I had Hannah Barnes on the show. She did a big investigation into GIDS, the gender identity something service that was at the Tavistock Clinic in the UK that's recently been shut down and then kind of restarted again. And then the restart kind of, I think, had some controversy as well. And there is an unbelievably high percentage of autism and OCD and other sort of co-psychopathology type things in the trans community. And there is this big question that she asked, which was, are people mentally disturbed because they're trans, or are they trans because they're mentally disturbed?
Yeah.
And there is a question to be asked that if untreated autism or OCD or something like that, if that ended up getting treated, whether the gender dysphoria downstream from that would dissipate. Well, and I think that would encounter in some of the real like hardline trans communities, I think that would encounter some challenges, because they would say that almost by getting rid of the autism, you're denying the personhood of the trans person.
Yeah.
Because it delegitimizes the gender dysphoria and almost makes it like how the light bulbs in here give off light, but also heat. It's like, oh, the gender dysphoria was a side effect of autism. And we don't know. We don't know the direction of causality here, but it's one of the most heavily contested, highly hot topics.
Would you be ostracized as a man that chooses not to be with a transgender woman in America?
Depends what you're talking about. I mean, this discussion of are you allowed to have your own preferences is fascinating, right? If you prefer blondes, is that somehow prejudiced against brunettes and gingers?
Yeah.
If you prefer tall girls, is that somehow prejudiced against petite girls? Like the line between the question of prejudice. Are you being either transphobic or homophobic by not dating somebody who is biologically the same sex as you but has transitioned? It seems like a slippery slope from there to just, well, why shouldn't you date somebody that self-IDs as that? I don't need to do the external comparison. Do you know Blair White? You familiar with her?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Blair's a good friend. She looks more like a girl than a lot of girls do, right? But I don't know if she was to get into a relationship with somebody and not open up about, well, she hasn't had bottom surgery, so it's a surprise that's waiting to visit you at some point.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating discussion. I do think that the not dating transitioned people is transphobic argument has kind of been and gone. Anybody that genuinely looks at that and says, yeah, you should date how we tell you to date, it's again, like, does that mean that I have to date everybody?
Yeah.
Why do I not have to be attracted to my video guy? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm allowed to have preferences.
Yeah.
And it becomes kind of a self-defeating.
Did you ever hear about the study with Dr. Money and the twins? So there was two twins that went to hospital to get circumcised.